I've been sitting on this story for years, mostly because saying it out loud makes it feel real in a way I'm not sure I'm ready for. But I've seen people here share worse, and I guess this is my turn. My name's William. I'm not going to pretend I was desperate in some cinematic, last option kind of way. I wasn't starving. I wasn't being hunted. I just got tired of being broke, tired of watching other people bend the rules and come out ahead while I stayed stuck playing it safe. The idea didn't hit me like lightning. It grew slowly, like mold in the corner of a room you don't clean often enough. I had a friend, well, more like an acquaintance, who used to joke about how easy it would be to fake a crisis and make people pay to fix it. Fear is the fastest currency, he once said. That line stuck with me longer than it should have. At first I laughed it off. Then I started noticing things, how quickly people panic, how irrational they get when someone they care about is in danger. It's like logic just shuts down. And somewhere along the way, a thought crossed my mind that I didn't push away. What if I could manufacture that fear? That's the part one hates admitting, the moment it stopped being a passing thought and started becoming a plan. Not a good plan, not even a smart one. Just a plan that felt possible. I told myself I wouldn't hurt anyone. That was my line. I wasn't a monster, right? Just someone trying to game a system that never really worked for me anyway. Funny how easy it is to redraw your own boundaries when it benefits you. After that thought took root, I couldn't really shake it. It kept coming back in quiet moments, on the bus, lying in bed, even while talking to people. I'd catch myself studying reactions, imagining scenarios, testing the idea in my head like it was some kind of puzzle. The logic felt disturbingly simple: create fear, control the narrative, collect the reward. I didn't jump into action right away. For a while, I just observed. I paid attention to how people responded to emergencies, what made them panic, what made them hesitate. News stories became research material. I started noticing patterns. Urgency beats clarity, emotion beats reason, and people will overlook a lot if they think time is running out. The hardest part wasn't the how. It was the who. I needed someone close enough to matter, but not so close that I'd lose control of the situation. That thought alone should have stopped me. Instead, it just narrowed my focus. That's when it stopped being hypothetical. This is the part I'm least proud of. Actually, that's not true, none of it makes me proud, but this is where it crossed from bad idea into something personal. Because once you start thinking about who, you're not just playing with theory anymore. You're putting a face into the plan. I went through people I knew like I was scrolling a list. Family was off limits. I told myself that immediately, like that made me principled. Close friends too. I needed distance, something that would let me stay calm if things got messy. I landed on Daniel. Not my friend, not really. We worked together briefly, stayed loosely in touch. Friendly enough that he'd recognize my name, distant enough that I knew pieces of his life without being in it. More importantly, he had people who cared about him, and some money in the family. Even writing that makes me feel sick. At the time, I justified it. Told myself no one would get hurt, that it would be quick, controlled. Just a scare. That's the lie everything else rested on. Once I chose Daniel, everything shifted into a different gear. The idea stopped floating around and started demanding structure. I began mapping things out, not on paper at first, just mentally. I'd run through scenarios while walking, refining details, spotting holes, patching them up. It felt less like planning a crime and more like solving a problem I'd convinced myself was harmless. I needed 3 things: a believable disappearance, a controlled line of communication, and a way to collect money without tying it back to me. Each part had to work on its own, but also fit together seamlessly. That's where it got complicated. I studied Daniel's routine, nothing obsessive, just casual observation. When he left work, where he usually went after, how predictable he was. The more I watched, the more confident I became. Predictability is a weakness when someone's looking for patterns. Looking back, I realize how calm I felt during this phase. Focused even. That should have been the biggest warning sign of all. Once the outline felt solid, I started handling the practical details. That's where things got more real than I expected. It wasn't just thinking anymore. I was making choices that left traces, even if I told myself they wouldn't. I avoided anything too obvious. No dramatic setups, no elaborate disguises. The plan depended on things looking ordinary right up until they didn't. I figured the less attention I drew beforehand, the easier it would be to control the situation later. I tested ways to communicate anonymously, rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd say it. Tone mattered more than words. I needed to sound urgent, believable, just enough to push panic without raising suspicion. I even practiced pacing, like timing pauses would somehow make it more convincing. At the same time, doubt started creeping in. Not enough to stop me, just enough to make me double-check everything. That's the dangerous middle ground, when you know something's wrong, but you've already invested too much to back out. So instead of stopping, I refined. There's a moment in anything like this where planning stops being separate from action. You don't announce it, you don't even fully acknowledge it, you just realize you've stepped over a line you can't step back from. For me, it was the first real move that affected someone else's life, not just my own thoughts. I started nudging circumstances, small things that would later make the story believable. Nothing dramatic, just subtle shifts, like setting the stage before the actors even know there's a play. I paid closer attention to timing. Daniel had routines, but routines have gaps, and those gaps were everything. I waited for one that felt right, one that wouldn't draw attention immediately. That patience made me feel in control, like I was smarter than the situation. I wasn't. What I didn't realize then was how unpredictable people become when they're scared, or how quickly things spiral once real emotions enter the equation. Up until that point, everything existed in my head. After that, there was no separating the plan from reality. This shift from planning to reality didn't feel dramatic. There was no thunder, no moment where I almost backed out. It was quieter than that, almost disappointingly normal. One minute I was following the outline I'd built in my head, and the next, people were reacting. That's when it hit me. I wasn't controlling a situation anymore. I had triggered one. The first responses didn't come to me directly, but I could see the ripple effect. Calls being made, routines breaking, concern turning into panic. It spread faster than I expected. Way faster. And instead of feeling powerful, I felt something else creeping in, uncertainty. Because real fear doesn't behave neatly. It doesn't follow your script. People don't react the way you rehearsed in your head. They escalate. They involve others. They make decisions you didn't account for. I remember sitting there, realizing for the first time that I had started something I didn't fully understand. And I still kept going. What I underestimated wasn't the act itself, it was the scale of the reaction. I thought I'd be dealing with a small circle, a few worry calls, maybe some rushed decisions, all contained and manageable. That illusion didn't last long. The situation grew legs almost immediately. More people got involved than I expected. Voices I hadn't accounted for started shaping the narrative, adding urgency, pushing things forward in ways I couldn't control. What I thought would stay quiet turned loud. And then came the involvement I really hadn't planned for, outside attention. The kind that doesn't just ask questions but demands answers. That was the first moment I felt real fear, not the controlled kind I'd tried to manufacture, but the kind that sits heavy in your chest and doesn't let you think straight. I tried to adjust, to steer things back into something I could manage. But every move I made felt reactive, not planned. That's when I realized I wasn't ahead of the situation anymore. I was chasing it. Once things started slipping, I told myself the only way out was forward. That's a dangerous mindset, convincing yourself that doubling down will somehow restore control. But at the time, it felt logical. If I could just stabilize the situation, everything would settle back into the version I had planned. I focused on consistency. Kept the story tight, avoided adding unnecessary details. I thought if I stayed disciplined, people would follow the narrative instead of questioning it. But the problem was, I wasn't the only one shaping that narrative anymore. There were too many variables now. Too many emotions in play. People don't just sit and wait when they're scared. They act, they speculate, they connect dots that may or may not exist. And sometimes, they get closer to the truth than you expect. I started noticing small cracks. Hesitations in responses, shifts in tone, moments where things didn't line up as cleanly as before. That's when doubt turned into something sharper. Not guilt. Not yet. Just the growing sense that I was losing control. The turning point wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, just a small inconsistency that shouldn't have mattered but did. Someone asked a question that didn't fit the script I'd built in my head. Not accusatory, not even suspicious on the surface. Just precise. It forced me to think in real time instead of relying on what I'd rehearsed. And that's where things started to slip. I gave an answer, but I could hear it myself, slightly off, not as clean as everything before. The kind of thing most people might ignore, but in a situation already charged with emotion, even small details stand out. Especially to the people who are paying the closest attention. After that, I couldn't stop replaying it. Every word, every pause, every possible interpretation. That's when the fear really set in, not of getting caught immediately, but of the slow unraveling. Because once doubt enters the room, it doesn't leave. It lingers, grows, connects to other doubts. And suddenly, you're not managing a situation anymore. You're trying to outrun it. After that first crack, everything started to feel heavier. Not just the situation, but me, like I was carrying it around physically. Sleep got weird. I'd either crash hard for a few hours or lie awake replaying every detail, every conversation, every possible way things could collapse. What surprised me most wasn't the fear of getting caught. It was the guilt creeping in where I didn't expect it. I'd convinced myself early on that no one would really be hurt, that it was just a controlled scare. But hearing the strain in people's voices, seeing how far the panic had spread, it chipped away at that lie. I started questioning my own decisions in real time. Not enough to stop, but enough to hesitate. And hesitation, in something like this, is dangerous. I found myself stuck between two instincts: pull back and risk everything falling apart immediately, or push forward and hope it somehow stabilizes. Neither felt like control anymore. Just different versions of losing it. At some point, you stop pretending you're steering anything. You're just bracing for impact. For me, that moment came when everything I'd been trying to hold together started slipping at once. Not one big failure, just a series of small things going wrong in quick succession. Misaligned details, unexpected reactions, pressure from directions I hadn't anticipated. It stacked up fast. And the more I tried to fix it, the worse it got. That's when panic finally caught up to me, not the kind I'd tried to create in others, but something raw and disorienting. My thoughts stopped lining up. Every decision felt like it could make things worse, so I hesitated, and that hesitation did make things worse. I remember realizing, very clearly, that there was no clean way out anymore. No version of events where everything just settled and disappeared. Whatever happened next was going to leave a mark. And for the first time, I stopped thinking about how to make it work, and started thinking about how bad it was going to get. When it finally caught up to me, it wasn't some dramatic takedown like in movies. No sudden burst of chaos. It was quieter, more deliberate. By then, I think a few people already suspected something was off. Maybe not the whole truth, but enough to start pulling at the threads. I remember the moment I realized I couldn't keep the story going. It wasn't even a decision, not really. More like something in me just gave out. The effort of maintaining it, adjusting it, living inside it, it got too heavy. The confrontation itself was uncomfortable in a way I hadn't prepared for. Not aggressive, not even angry at first. Just questions. Direct ones. The kind you can't dodge forever without exposing yourself. And I tried briefly. Instinct, I guess. But the more I spoke, the more obvious it became that the story didn't hold anymore. That's the thing about lies under pressure. They don't break cleanly. They unravel, slowly, in front of everyone. And I was right there with them. Once everything came out, there wasn't really a single moment where it ended. It just shifted into something else, quieter, but heavier. The chaos I'd created didn't disappear, it settled into consequences. People reacted in ways I hadn't fully imagined. Some were angry, obviously. Others were just disappointed. That one stuck more than anything. Anger burns out, but disappointment lingers. It changes how people look at you, how they talk to you, or don't. The practical fallout was messy too. Questions, explanations, things I had to face that I'd been avoiding the entire time. I won't get into specifics, but let's just say, getting away with it stopped being part of the equation pretty quickly. What surprised me most was the silence afterward. No adrenaline, no urgency. Just space to sit with what I'd done. And in that silence, the story I told myself, the one where this was controlled, harmless, temporary, completely fell apart. There was no version of this where I came out unchanged. That part wasn't negotiable anymore. If you're expecting some clean lesson or dramatic turnaround, I don't really have one. What I have is a quieter kind of clarity, the kind that shows up after everything's already been broken. I used to think the worst part of doing something like this would be getting caught. It's not. It's realizing how easily you convinced yourself it was acceptable in the first place. That's the part that sticks with you, the version of yourself that built the justification and ran with it. Fear isn't something you can control just because you start it. It spreads, mutates, pulls in people you never intended to affect. And once it's out there, you don't get to decide how it ends. If anyone reading this is toying with the idea of cutting corners like I did, don't dress it up as something clever or harmless. It isn't. You're not managing a situation. You're creating one you won't fully understand until it's too late. And by then, you don't get to rewrite it. You just have to live with it.